evening. Thank you very much for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. I am Heena Gambhir. For the last 6 days, Ukrainians are living humanity's worst nightmare. Russia is bombing cities, launching missiles, firing rockets at major cities in Ukraine. Russia's devastating attack has taken countless lives, tearing apart an entire country. All this to take control of the capital city. There are satellite images that we are now showing you of a long build-up of armored vehicles and artillery at north of the capital city. Russia is now targeting residential and administrative buildings. The Ukrainian government shared a video that shows a government building in Kharkiv going up in flames after being hit by a Russian missile. In fact, the central square of Ukraine's second largest city was shelled by Russian forces too. These are the visuals of what remains today. Debris. Talks between Ukraine and Russia have made no headway either. Russia's brutal assault continues even as Ukraine is putting up a fierce resistance. Human lives have become collateral damage to this power play. Today alone, 70 Ukrainian soldiers and dozens of civilians died in a rocket attack as the Russian military convoy approached Kyiv, the capital city. It's not just the Ukrainians and Russians dying, but even our own people are becoming casualties in this war. First Indian casualty is 21-year-old Naveen, and his tragic death is heartbreaking. He was out to buy food at the grocery store when he was shot dead by Russian soldiers. Joining us on the broadcast this evening is senior Congress leader, who is also a member of parliament, Mr. Manish Tewari. Thank you very much, Mr. Manish Tiwari, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. It is day 6 of Russian war on Ukraine, and we've got some really sad news. A medical student from Karnataka who was studying in Ukraine has died. He was standing in a queue outside a grocery store for food. How will you like to react today? The family is devastated because he and his family members were seeing over the last few days evacuation process going on, and we all were hoping that all these stranded Indians will be back home soon.
Well, it's an extremely unfortunate situation, and my condolences first to the family of Naveen Gambhir. Our prayers are with his family in their hour of extreme grief and sorrow. And what is playing itself out in Ukraine is extremely unfortunate. It is tragic. It is a travesty of all canons of international behavior. And unfortunately, this conflict in Ukraine is going to have larger implications. And as I had written a couple of days earlier, that a new iron curtain seems to be descending on the world. And therefore, you are going to see major geopolitical alliances and various other configurations emerge. You will see a rearmament of major nations in Europe, which is going to take place. So therefore, in many senses of the word, what is happening in Ukraine with the Russian invasion has completely and absolutely upended the international order, the rule-based international order.
You're expecting major geopolitical alliances to emerge. We'll talk about the evolving situation in just a bit, but Mr. Manish Tewari, I want to first discuss with you India's evacuation strategy, because today we have seen, evacuation strategy of the country being questioned. Where do you stand on this matter? Do you think India has delayed the evacuation process? Because on 28th of February, even you had written a letter to Prime Minister Narendra Modi asking him to further intensify the process.
Well, it's a difficult situation, and the government of India, of course, finds itself between the rock and the hard place. There are geopolitical considerations which need to be taken into account. There is also the fact that more than 20,000 Indian students and a very large Indian community has been caught in the crosshairs of the Russian aggression. Almost 600 or 700,000 people have left Ukraine. So therefore, there is a major exodus which is taking place towards Ukraine's borders with Poland, with Belarus, which unfortunately seems to be on the side of the belligerents in this war towards Slovakia, towards Romania, towards Moldova. And the most worrying is that those Indian students who are in the eastern part of Ukraine, which is the closest to from where the aggression took place, cities like Kharkiv, etc., lie very close to the Russian border. And so, therefore, their route of evacuation actually lies across the conflict lines into Russia and then back home, either through the port of Odessa or through an airport. I think it's Rodnev, which is about 100 kilometers from Kharkiv. So I would like to urge the government of India that in addition to whatever they're trying to do to help on the western borders, Prime Minister Narendra Modi needs to pick up the phone and talk to President Putin and needs to set up an evacuation route through the Russian front lines to get all those students who are currently stuck in eastern Ukraine, because I don't think that the situation as it stands with the conflict having intensified with missile strikes and artillery shelling taking place on major Ukrainian cities, that these students will safely be able to make their ways to the western border. You are seeing heart-rending scenes on railway stations in Kyiv and various other evacuation mechanisms which are currently still operating. But obviously, with the Russian army on the move, how safe the roads are is a million-dollar question. And we can only hope and pray that we do not have more casualties. But yes, it is a difficult situation. And I'm sure that the government is definitely trying to do its very best. You have all these videos which are being sent by Indian students from basements, from bunkers, from the Polish-Ukrainian border. Each one of them is a wrench on your heart, and you pray for them, their safety. My solidarity is with their families who must be absolutely on a razor's edge. And with the tragedy which has taken place today, war has come very closer home to those 20,000 families who still have loved ones who are stuck in the conflict zone.
War has come closer home. You're also telling us that Prime Minister Modi needs to speak to Russian president. But as far as our evacuation process is concerned, do you think we are on the right track now, or do we now need to be a little more aggressive? Because now we know that, union ministers have been sent as well to the neighboring countries to oversee the evacuation process.
Well, eventually, flights can only bring those many people back home as will be able to get across the borders. And therefore, I don't think that there are accurate numbers available as to how many people have really made it across those borders. And Government of India has deployed senior ministers. I've seen something on social media saying that the Prime Minister has even advised that the Air Force should stand by. So obviously, Government of India would do the very best that it can, but eventually it comes down to how many people can get across, because you can only help once they are across the border. But till the time they make it to the border, these poor kids and the Indian community and many others who are evacuating, as I said, almost 700,000 people have fled Ukraine. Till the time they get to safety, they are unfortunately very much on their own. But yes, there needs to be an evacuation line which needs to be established in the eastern part of Ukraine to bring the students and the Indian community out. Those people who unfortunately, with the conflict intensifying, may find it extremely difficult to get to the western borders.
In fact, that is an important point you're making because western border is being considered as slightly safer as compared to the eastern border, and that's the reason why I asked you, this question: did India delay the evacuation? Because now we are in the middle of a war. The situation is very difficult. It's not easy for the students, the Indians who are stranded. That most of them are students, medical students in their, 80. They're about 18 to 20 years old. It's not easy. Most of them are in bunkers today. So even to reach to the western part of Ukraine is not really easy. So did we delay it?
Well, that's a chicken and egg question because I guess everybody was hopeful that President Putin was actually indulging in brinkmanship and what is called coercive diplomacy, that he would not take the final step of actually unleashing aggression. But unfortunately, things have turned out the other way. I guess if you go by the intelligence estimates that were available in the public space when President Putin decided to move heavy armor from places as far as Siberia, thousands of miles away from their eastern border with Ukraine, we should have anticipated, like many other countries, that President Putin unfortunately was not bluffing. And so, therefore, to that extent, you can say that perhaps it was a failure of trying to interpret a situation correctly. But then, you are always wiser by hindsight. You can. There are conscious calls which need to be made. And to some extent, I think even students and the community and other people in Ukraine possibly never thought that this things would come to this pass since the standoff in eastern Ukraine has now been going on, going all the way back to 2014. So therefore, there was this expectation that if at all there would be war, it would be a limited war, limited to occupying, those parts of eastern Ukraine which President Putin decided to recognize as liberated and independent spaces in his address when he laid out his flawed case for war. But you now have to deal with the situation as it stands and try and make the best out of it. And I guess, whatever needs to be done, perhaps is being done. But eventually, it all depends upon how many people are able to get out. And once they get out, then are adequate logistics available in terms of transport, in terms of aircrafts to get them safely to India. So I guess that contingency planning the government would be factoring in into their calculations. But in the middle of a situation as complicated as this, I don't think it would be appropriate to indulge in any finger pointing.
Okay, interesting. But let's also now talk about India's response at the UN Security Council. India abstained and vote against Russia. Do you think it was the right decision? Because, India clearly has interests in both the countries, be it Ukraine or Russia. What should be the right approach given the current circumstances at a time when the West the European nations have become so vocal against Vladimir Putin's actions against Ukraine?
Well, as I earlier pointed out, that a new Iron Curtain seems to be descending on the world. We are now going to be in an entirely new situation and a new Cold War, which would obviously follow this hot war, is on us. It seems as if the clock has been rewound back to 1946 when Winston Churchill made that famous speech at the Georgetown School in Fulton Falls in Missouri. And when he had said that an Iron Curtain has descended across Europe from Stettin in the Baltic right up till the Adriatic Sea. But what we are seeing now is far more ominous. And you will find various alliances taking place. It is no coincidence that President Putin was in Beijing just before this conflict commenced, and he and President Xi Jinping actually laid out the principles of a new international order in a joint statement. It is obviously no coincidence that Prime Minister Imran Khan showed up in Moscow the very day Russia decided to invade Ukraine. And then, of course, you have certain countries whose regimes are totalitarian, for the lack of a better characterization, actually weighing in on the side of Russia. But as I have been repeatedly pointing out, that in the 21st century, when we talk about a rules-based world order, to try and change the territorial status quo by force, to try and take over the ninth largest country in terms of territory, by the use of force and arms, is absolutely a travesty, and it needs to be condemned. Government of India, actually is between the rock and the hard place, but more and more civil society voices need to speak up. I mean, Russia has been a friend, a time-tested ally, if I were to use that term. But there comes a moment when nations have to stand up, and they can't stand by. And even friends need to be told that if they are in the wrong, what is wrong and what is right.
Okay, interesting. Now, where do you see the current situation heading? Because not many people, not many countries have many hopes from the talks that are likely to happen tomorrow again between Russia and Ukraine. There was nothing significant that we got from the first round yesterday, because Ukraine clearly wants ceasefire. Ukraine wants Russian troops to be out of its territory. Russia, however, has been pushing for some sort of a written agreement. First, it was just about ensuring that Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Where do you see the current situation heading from here on?
Well, first of all, to try and regurgitate historical grievances and use that as an excuse in order to unleash aggression is something which is completely unacceptable in the 21st century. If Russia has apprehensions about the eastward expansion of NATO, the question that they should have asked themselves is that why did the erstwhile East European countries, which were in the Soviet orbit of influence before the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989, why did they all start leaning towards the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Why have there been three waves of membership by East European nations of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union? And the reason is not very difficult to discern. I happen to actually live in Prague way back in the early 90s when I was the president of the International Union of Students. And that's when the map of East Europe was actually changing. And I had the opportunity of traveling around most of Eastern Europe at that point in time. And the record of the Soviet Union between 1945 and 1991 was nothing which covered themselves with any glory, because there had been repeated interventions, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, and there were extremely bitter memories about the totalitarian form of government, all the way from Bulgaria right up till what was then Czechoslovakia, encompassing Romania, Hungary, and various other East European countries. So therefore, if you start going down the path of correcting historical wrongs or perceived historical wrongs through the use of force, I do not know as to where is this going to stop. And then you see the specter of Russia actually putting its nuclear forces, what they have termed as deterrence forces, on an alert.
Right.
And so we are looking at an extremely uncomfortable specter. And it's not very clear what is Russia's end game They are saying that we want the demilitarization of Ukraine, but if Russia thinks that it will be able to occupy a country the size of Ukraine through the use of force, I'm afraid this is not going to end well for Russia. It might just be another Afghanistan. And let us not forget that it was the occupation of Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989,
Right.
which ultimately led to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Hmm. All right, Mr. Tiwari, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Urban Debate.